Alejandro was a 9-year-old boy with a big, bright smile. His smile made everyone happy. It was the kind of smile that could make all worries go away. But one cold, rainy night, Alejandro was about to discover something very sad. It was a secret that would hurt his heart and change his life forever. Alejandro was sleeping when he felt a warm hand shaking him gently. He opened his eyes and saw his mother. She was smiling, but her eyes looked sad. "Come on, sweetheart. We're going on a special walk," she said softly. Alejandro rubbed his eyes, feeling confused. Why would they go for a walk in the middle of the night? But he trusted his mother. "Why now, Mom?" he asked, his voice small and unsure. "It's a surprise, darling," she said quickly, as if she didn't want him to ask more questions. Alejandro got out of bed, his bare feet touching the cold floor. He shivered as he put on his shoes and coat. His father helped button up his coat, but he didn't say anything. He just stared into the distance, looking sad and serious. "Where are we going, Dad?" Alejandro asked, hoping his father would say something comforting. "Don't worry, Alejandro. It's a special place," his father said, but his voice didn't sound warm like usual. The three of them stepped outside into the cold night. The wind was strong, and the rain poured down heavily. Alejandro held his mother's hand as they walked through the empty streets. The rain soaked his hair and made his coat wet, even though it was buttoned up tightly. As they walked farther away from home, the streets became darker and quieter. Alejandro started to feel scared, but he still trusted his parents. "Can we go back home? It's really cold, and I'm so tired," Alejandro said, his voice shaking. His mother looked down at him with a sad smile. "Soon, Alejandro. Very soon," she whispered. The road became even darker, and the street lights were too dim to help much. Alejandro held his mother's hand tighter. A strange feeling grew inside him, a mix of fear and confusion. "Mom, I'm scared," he said, his voice trembling. He hoped she would comfort him, tell him everything was okay. But she said nothing. The silence felt heavy and scary. Alejandro didn't understand why his parents were acting so differently. His mother's smiles didn't feel real, and his father's silence made him uneasy. Soon, they reached a bridge. Alejandro recognized it right away. It was a place children in his neighborhood never went to, even during the day. Now, in the rain and darkness, it looked even scarier. "Why are we here, Mom?" Alejandro asked, his voice shaking. His mother knelt down and held his face in her hands. He saw tears in her eyes, even though she tried to hide them. "Alejandro, remember this. We love you very much. Always remember that," she said, her voice full of sadness. Alejandro's heart started to beat faster. Something about the way she spoke felt like a goodbye. A painful goodbye. He turned to his father, hoping for comfort, but his father wouldn't even look at him. "Dad, won't you say anything to me?" Alejandro asked, feeling desperate. His father finally spoke, but his words felt empty. "Don't be afraid, Alejandro. Everything will be fine." But his voice didn't sound right. It wasn't loving or kind. It made Alejandro feel even more alone. Tears filled Alejandro's eyes. He felt like everything he loved was slipping away. "I want to go home," Alejandro cried, his sobs shaking his small body. His mother looked down, avoiding his eyes. His father just stared at the river below the bridge. The rain fell harder, the night feeling colder. Alejandro felt like even the sky was crying. Then, his father suddenly grabbed Alejandro's shoulders. His hands were strong, and the grip hurt. "This is for your own good," his father said, but his voice was cold. "What are you doing, Dad?" Alejandro stammered, fear making his voice shake. His father didn't answer. Instead, he pushed Alejandro hard. Before Alejandro could understand what was happening, he was falling. A scream ripped from his throat, filling the night. His heart pounded as he fell into the dark, cold water below. The impact was hard. The icy water stabbed his skin like needles. He struggled, trying to stay above the water, but the river was strong and wild. The waves pulled him down again and again. "Mom, Dad, help me," Alejandro screamed, his voice desperate. But no one answered. The rain kept falling, the river kept roaring, and Alejandro was all alone. His arms and legs grew tired. The cold made him weak. His body felt heavier, and his vision started to fade. I don't want to die, he whispered, tears mixing with the rain and water. Just when all hope was fading, a voice cut through the storm. Hold on, kid, a man shouted from the riverbank. Alejandro could barely see through the rain, but he heard the voice. It was strong and full of hope. The man was Mateo. He had seen Alejandro fall and didn't hesitate to act. Without thinking twice, Mateo jumped into the freezing water. Don't give up. I'm coming, Mateo shouted, swimming through the strong currents. Alejandro, barely conscious, could hardly believe someone was coming for him. He had no strength left. I can't, Alejandro mumbled, his voice weak. Finally, Mateo reached him. A strong hand grabbed Alejandro's arm. The warmth of that grip gave him a tiny bit of hope. I've got you, kid. You're safe now. I won't let go, Mateo promised. Using all his strength, Mateo swam back to shore, holding Alejandro tightly. The waves tried to pull them apart, but Mateo refused to let go. When they finally reached land, Mateo pulled Alejandro into his arms. Alejandro sobbed into his chest, shaking from fear and cold. Thank you, Alejandro stammered, his voice breaking. For the first time that night, he felt warmth. Mateo, breathing hard from the rescue, held him close. You're safe now. Alejandro was safe, but one painful question filled his heart. Why did his parents do this? Mateo looked at the river, sadness in his eyes. I don't understand how they could do this, he said, but I promise you, everything will be okay now. Alejandro looked up at him, confused. How could a stranger care more for him than his own parents? Why? He whispered, too hurt to say more. Mateo sighed and ran a hand through Alejandro's wet hair. I don't know, Alejandro, but I do know this. You deserve love and protection, and I swear, I'll keep you safe. Alejandro stared at Mateo, searching his face. And for the first time, he saw something he had lost that night. Hope. Will you leave me? Alejandro asked, his small hands gripping Mateo's coat. Never, Alejandro. Never, Mateo said firmly. You're with me now, and no one will ever hurt you again. Mateo's words wrapped around Alejandro like a warm blanket. The fear in his heart slowly faded, replaced by something new, trust. What will happen to me now? Alejandro asked, his voice still shaky. Mateo smiled gently. Now we start over. It won't be the life you imagined, but it will be a good one. A life with love and care. Alejandro looked up at Mateo, still unsure, but wanting to believe. Slowly he nodded. Maybe, just maybe, things would be okay again. Under the night sky, Mateo held Alejandro close, making sure he would never feel alone again. Alejandro started to believe, just a little, that maybe life was giving him a second chance. This chance came from a stranger, someone who helped him when everything felt dark. Mateo didn't just save Alejandro that night. He became the father Alejandro had always wished for. From the moment Mateo brought Alejandro home, he made a promise he would never break. This is your home now, Alejandro, Mateo said as he tucked the boy into a small, cozy bed he had prepared. You're part of my family, and I will make sure you never feel alone again. Alejandro looked up at Mateo with eyes still filled with fear, but something in his words made Alejandro feel a little bit safe. Mateo took care of Alejandro with love, not just because he had to, but because he wanted to. He signed him up for school, making sure he had new clothes, books, and everything he needed. Come on, Alejandro. Today is your first day of school. You'll make new friends and learn new things. And I'll be here when you come home, Mateo said one morning while helping Alejandro put on his backpack. Alejandro nodded, his big eyes filled with a mix of excitement and worry. He was scared to go out into the world again after all that had happened. But when Mateo hugged him before they left the house, Alejandro felt a little braver. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Mateo spent time with Alejandro at the kitchen table, teaching him to read and write. He pointed at words in an old storybook and said, "Look, this word says brave, just like you, Alejandro." At first, Alejandro only gave a small, shy smile. But over time, those words made him feel stronger. Mateo wasn't just teaching him letters and numbers. He was showing Alejandro what it felt like to be truly loved. No matter what happens, Alejandro, I will always be here for you. You can count on me for anything, Mateo would say. He repeated these words many times, especially when he saw Alejandro lost in thought. But Alejandro still had nightmares about the night that changed his life. He would wake up shaking, his heart pounding, hearing his father's angry voice in his head. But every time he was scared, Mateo was there. He would hold Alejandro close and whisper, "That night is over, Alejandro. You are safe now. You are so much stronger than you think." With Mateo's love and support, Alejandro slowly let go of his fear. He was no longer the frightened little boy who had been pulled from the cold water. He grew up into a strong young man, full of confidence. His once scared eyes now shone with bravery. Mateo's care had changed him. He was no longer just surviving, he was living. The memories of that terrible night never fully went away, but instead of pain, they became proof of how strong he was. "I couldn't have done this without you," Alejandro said one day, his voice full of love and gratitude. Mateo smiled proudly and said, "Don't thank me, Alejandro. You are the one who never gave up. I chose you as my son, and nothing makes me happier." One afternoon, while looking through some old boxes, Alejandro saw a yellowed envelope sticking out. Curious, he picked it up and opened it. The letter inside was written in rushed, shaky handwriting. As he read it, his heart pounded. The letter revealed a terrible secret. His own parents had planned to get rid of him, so they could collect money from a life insurance policy in his name. Alejandro's hands shook as he read the words. The letter was written by a neighbor who had overheard his parents talking about their plan. "This can't be real," Alejandro whispered, his voice breaking. Tears filled his eyes as he thought about how his parents had chosen money over him. Anger and sadness filled his heart. He had suffered so much, and now he knew the truth. Determined to find out more, Alejandro started searching. He looked through records, visited offices, and asked questions. Some people got nervous when he spoke to them, but he didn't stop. After weeks of searching, he finally met the lawyer who had handled the insurance policy. The man was middle-aged, with a smug grin that made Alejandro uneasy. "Listen, son, I know this is hard," the lawyer said, pretending to be kind. "But let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." He slid a thick, white envelope across the desk. It was full of money. Alejandro stared at it, disgusted. "I won't let money silence me," Alejandro said firmly. He didn't even look at the cash. His eyes burned with determination. He had suffered too much to be bought so easily. The lawyer sighed and leaned closer. "You don't understand, kid. The people behind this aren't the forgiving type. Think carefully before you make a mistake you'll regret." Alejandro didn't back down. "I don't care who they are," he said. "I won't stop until the truth comes out. They don't get to win." The lawyer, seeing that Alejandro wouldn't be scared or bribed, scowled. "You're brave, but foolish," he said before walking out of the room. Alejandro stared at the envelope full of money. He didn't touch it. Instead, he clenched his fists and whispered, "This isn't over." Alejandro kept digging for the truth. Every piece of new information made him realize how heartless his parents had been. They hadn't made a quick, desperate decision. It had been a well-planned act of greed. Each new discovery filled Alejandro with anger, sadness, and determination. He couldn't stop now. Finally, Alejandro went to his parents' home. When they saw him, his mother gasped, holding her chest. His father sat silently, his face filled with guilt. "My son," his mother cried, tears running down her face. Alejandro didn't let her words fool him. "Why?" he asked. Just one word, but it carried years of pain. His mother covered her face, sobbing. His father looked away, his voice shaking. "We were desperate. We had no choice." Alejandro's anger exploded. "There's always a choice. You did this for money." His voice trembled with pain. "I was just a child." His parents flinched at his words. They looked small and weak now. "We have suffered every day since then," his mother pleaded. "Please forgive us." Alejandro shook his head. "This isn't about what you suffered. This is about what you did to me." His voice was cold, strong. He had waited years for this moment, but now he felt nothing but emptiness. "Forgive us," his mother whispered, but Alejandro had already decided. "I'm not here for forgiveness," he said. "I'm here to end this chapter." He turned to leave, but his father suddenly spoke again, his voice darker now. "If you expose us, You'll ruin more than just us, he warned. Think about what the world will say. They'll call you the son who destroyed his own parents. They will hunt you like a monster. Alejandro looked at his father, his eyes wide with shock. His father's words were like ice, cold and sharp, cutting deep into Alejandro's heart. It wasn't just a way to protect himself. It was a threat. Alejandro felt his anger grow stronger, like a fire burning inside him. Even after everything, his father was still trying to control him. You don't understand what it means to be desperate, his father finally said. His voice was sad, almost defeated. People do terrible things when they have no choice. Alejandro closed his eyes for a moment. He was trying to think clearly, but the pain was too much. He remembered the promise he made to himself, to find the truth no matter what. Then he heard Mateo's words in his mind, strong and steady. Don't let fear decide for you, Alejandro. The truth is always worth it, even when it hurts. Alejandro opened his eyes. He felt stronger. I'm not afraid anymore, he said, stepping closer to his father. I don't care what the media says or what people think. All that matters is that you threw me into the river for money. And now, the world will know. His father's face changed. His eyes were full of anger and fear. He knew he had lost control over Alejandro. Alejandro, please, his mother cried, grabbing his leg. Don't do this to us. We're your family. Alejandro bent down and looked into her eyes. His stare was cold. You stopped being my family the night you pushed me into that river, he said. His words were sharp, like a knife. Silence filled the room again. But for Alejandro, it felt freeing. This moment, this painful conversation, was the last thing he needed. He could finally move forward. He stood up straight, holding his head high. For the first time in years, he felt strong. He looked at his parents one last time. They sat there, crushed by the truth. Then, without another word, Alejandro turned and walked away. Each step took him further from the past, the pain, and the betrayal, closer to freedom. Alejandro knew this was the moment. His hands shook as he picked up his phone and dialed the police. He knew this call would change his life forever. When the dispatcher answered, Alejandro took a deep breath. It felt like he was letting go of a heavy weight. I want to report an attempted murder and insurance fraud. I have the evidence, he said. The dispatcher asked him for details. Alejandro, without fear, told them everything he had learned. His voice shook a little, but his courage was stronger. My parents tried to kill me when I was a child. They did it for money, he said. When the call ended, silence filled the room again. His parents sat across from him, their faces pale with fear. His mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, reached out to him. Alejandro, please, don't do this, she begged, her voice full of sadness. Alejandro looked at her. He felt a little sad, seeing the woman who had once been his mother. But he knew he couldn't change his mind. He stepped back. There is no son here, he said. Our bond ended the night you threw me into that river. His mother fell to the floor, crying uncontrollably. His father, on the other hand, tried to stay strong. If you expose us, Alejandro, you will destroy us. But you will destroy yourself too. Think about how people will see you. Alejandro looked at his father, unshaken. The man who once controlled him now had no power. I don't care what anyone thinks, he said firmly. I would rather be the son who told the truth than live as the victim of a terrible lie. Mateo, who had been quiet, stepped forward. He placed a hand on Alejandro's shoulder. You did the right thing, Alejandro, he said. This isn't about what others think. It's about standing up for the truth. Alejandro nodded. He felt both peace and strength inside him. For the first time, he felt truly free. Suddenly, they heard sirens in the distance. The police had arrived. Officers rushed into the house, ready to act. Alejandro stood tall, handing them the evidence he had collected. He told them everything, the plan, the attempt to kill him, the money his parents wanted. They planned it all when I was just a child, Alejandro explained. They threw me into the river to collect a life insurance payout. The officers listened closely. The truth was shocking, casting a dark shadow over the room. Alejandro's parents didn't fight back. They let the officers handcuff them. His mother sobbed, while his father whispered, "We had no other choice." Alejandro looked at his father one last time. He felt both pity and relief. His father's words no longer mattered. There is always another choice, Alejandro thought. As the police car drove away, Alejandro felt something lift from his shoulders. The past had shaped him, but now he was ready to build a new future. Alejandro decided to use his story to help others. He started a foundation to rescue children in danger. The foundation wasn't just a shelter. It was a place where children found love and safety. Every child that arrived, scared and broken, was welcomed by Alejandro himself. He would kneel to their level and say in a soft voice, "You're safe now. No one will hurt you here." Some children cried, letting go of their fear. Alejandro always told them, "Your future can still be full of dreams." Over time, the foundation became a place of hope. Alejandro, once a scared child himself, became a hero to many. One evening, Alejandro turned to Mateo. "I want to go back to the bridge," he said. Mateo nodded. He understood how important this moment was. As the sun began to set, they arrived at the bridge. The river below looked calm, nothing like the night Alejandro was thrown in. Alejandro stood still, looking at the water. He took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. "This place doesn't scare me anymore," he said. "It's just another memory now. It has no power over me." For Alejandro, the bridge was no longer a place of pain. It was proof of his strength. Mateo smiled at him with pride. "You're amazing, Alejandro. You turned your pain into something incredible." Alejandro looked at him, remembering the night Mateo had saved him. "It's all because of you, Mateo. If you hadn't been there, I don't know where I'd be." Mateo shook his head. "Don't thank me. You're the one who chose to be strong. Everything you have now is because of your courage." Alejandro hugged Mateo tightly. He felt the weight of the past finally leave him, replaced by hope for the future. He looked at the river one last time. "I'm no longer the boy who was thrown into the water," he said. "Now, I'm the man who saves others from drowning." Mateo, his eyes filled with pride, held Alejandro's shoulder. He knew that the scared boy from the past didn't need saving anymore. Alejandro had become a leader, a hero, a light for others lost in the darkness. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring and heartwarming stories and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.